Hello, everyone. Welcome to Gen AI Talkin' 10, brought to you by SS&C Blue Prism. I'm Brad. He's Satish. So, Satish, let's talk about the different ways that Gen AI is being consumed.
Thank you, Brad. So let's start with individuals because that I think is quite easy to address, right? In the realm of individuals, it's what you're seeing is it's about two things: productivity and creativity, right? Productivity being doing things more efficiently, and creativity being doing new things that were not previously possible, or doing exciting, innovative things, right? So the two most common things we hear about individuals using Gen AI are ChatGPT. You keep hearing that. That's been the case. Maybe there are some variations of ChatGPT. I use an application that allows you to change the models, change even the temperature of models. And I mean, if you want to get all complex and you want to play with it, there are many, many options available that go on top of ChatGPT, but also give you access to different models beyond GPT, right? You can change the model that you're using and so on. So I use something called Mag AI. If there's if there's interest, people can look into it. But there's many, many options. It doesn't matter what option you pick. They're similar, right? So now they're using that to create content, images, videos, and so on, right? You can, these services, by the way, that give you options, will also give options to do images and videos and so on. So that's why people, they might use ChatGPT under the covers, but they'll still use maybe a service that's a little different.
That's a lot of these are free services, right? But don't necessarily get the protection, the privacy that you may desire. So any prompts you give it, any information you share in your prompts, they tell you will be used to retrain the model, and it will be potentially out there in the public domain. Is that fair?
Well, definitely. And it's a great point to caution people when they're using ChatGPT, whether it's within our company or elsewhere, right? You have to be careful. When I use ChatGPT, for example, I don't want to use it for any company specific information, because the minute you put SS&C or some reference to that in a prompt, it's out there, and that's not what you want, right? So you have to be real careful. The second thing we have heard from individuals using, especially in the professional context, I'm not going to go into, from a personal standpoint, but co-pilots, right? I was just speaking to a friend yesterday. He was so excited about using co-pilots, right? That can be with any kind of app. But what the most common one you hear is Microsoft apps, right? Because people are using Microsoft Word and PowerPoint and all those. Now, keep in mind though, when you use Copilot, right, especially because most people know Microsoft, they're very good for personal productivity, right? You can do things with PowerPoint and Word and Teams and so on, but you cannot really use that in an enterprise context, right? Because what you end up doing is then there's no good governance, etc., right? So it's not quite the same with personal productivity versus, using it in an enterprise context. A subset of those Copilot users will also use it for coding. If they're developers, for example, you hear them say, "Oh, I'm using it for creating new code or doing some code test loops, right, for code testing, or the code autocomplete and so on." So very interesting to see people using in those two buckets, if you will, as individuals. Now, let's shift gears and talk about companies, right? What have we seen and heard lately that's happening, with Gen AI as it's being consumed? So when you look at the Gen AI platform itself, right, and the large language models, 4 things are happening with models that are very interesting. People are moving from large models to smaller models. Why? Because smaller models are easier to use, cheaper, potentially. They're also specific to a domain or what have you. The latency is lower, right? The larger the model, the higher the latency, the more the computing, the more the resources you need to use that model, right? So they're going from large language models to small language models, number one. They're going from generic to domain-specific or custom models. We talked about that briefly. From commercial to open source models. From tech to our favorite multimodal models we just talked about in a different episode, right? So the most interesting thing I've heard, though, with these models and with what's happening in Gen AI is the expansion of business models, right? This is the same business model we all know and love, right? What are the two most common types of business models, Brad? B2B and
B2C.
Right?
Yep.
So what's interesting is now you throw in two more things. B2T or thing, right? Because of IoT, Internet of Things. And B2A, which is the agent. We talked about agent in a different episode. This whole idea of agents running around and doing things autonomously, taking decisions, making decisions, taking actions, all of these. So what's interesting is now you have not just B2B and B2C, you have B2T, B2A, C2T, C2A, all kinds of combinations of things. Let me give you an example of B2T, right? Because people are thinking, he's just making this up? Are these alphabet soups? Well, if you think about B2T, a business, I drive a Tesla. So there's the world, it's not that far in the future where we'll have autonomous driving cars. You've seen that in places like San Francisco. I recently took a ride in one of those cars, right? Driverless cars, completely driverless. No human touch at all, right? So you could see how in a B2T model, businesses could offer car parking to autonomous vehicles. Isn't that interesting, right?
Yeah.
That world where, the business itself can say, okay, if a car needs parking and it is a driverless car, now I can talk to that car and engage with that car and actually offer it parking. Just giving an example of the kind of things we should expect to see and new business models coming up because of those two additional things. It's not just about the model changing, which we talked about, right? All the different changes happening there, but also the business models changing. Versus business models, two very different things.
Right.
They're interacting, right? Because the changes with AI, you're seeing changes in business models. So,
Satish, do you find with the large language models that most companies are looking to a third-party provider like a Google versus trying to build and maintain a model themselves within their own enterprise?
We're seeing some customers do that, right? Where they might start with an Azure OpenAI or an AWS Bedrock or a Google Vertex for sure, if that's a good place to start. But very quickly they realize maybe some use cases, they need a specific type of model. Like we have talked about in a different episode, a multimodal model, right? If I'm a healthcare company, maybe for most of my use cases, a commercial model will suffice. But when it comes to serving patients in a particular use case, maybe I want a multimodal model. I don't want to use that. Maybe it's more expensive to use a multimodal model. So I don't want to use that across the board, but I want to use it for a particular use case. So you see that happening, right? You also see this whole idea of, going from commercial to open source, going from large to small, etc.
You mentioned just the move to the small language models. I mean, it's really amazing to see the proliferation there and places like Hugging Face where you can go and find thousands of models, mostly small language models, but not all small language models, and they can be very domain specific. It's really fascinating how the SLM providers or companies that are creating SLMs getting to be kind of on the leading edge, so to speak.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and especially as companies move from experimentation to production, they're
Yeah.
realizing that using these large language models might not be the most efficient and most cost sensitive or
Yeah.
appropriate
Hmm.
for their business for a specific use case. I think
Right.
is one of it is driven by the use case and the affordability and so on, right? So
Great. Well, thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time on Gen AI Talk in 10.